Okay, so let's talk about the protostomes. So chapter 31 is talking about a group known as the protostomes. So last chapter we talked about these monoblastic and diploblastic animals here. Now we're going to talk about, everything we're going to talk about is in a clade called Bilateria. So they are all animals that have bilateral symmetry. They are all triploblastic with bilateral symmetry. And we divide them into three smaller clades. We have the Lophotrochozoans, which are protostomes, and the Ecdysozoans, which are also protostomes. So we're going to talk about these guys today. There is a third clade among bilateral organisms known as the Deuterostomes, and we will talk about them next chapter. So let's talk a little bit about some characters of protostomes. So by individual count, they are by far the most numerous organisms. I cannot find my eraser, so I'm going to be really classy and use my sleeve. So they're the most numerous. Because of the, if we're going by just individual count, they are considered the most successful format for a bilateral organism. Kind of the main thing that makes them a protostome is that the blastopore of the gastrula is going to become the mouth. In fact, the word protostome means mouth first, a reference to the fact that that first opening, the blastopore, is going to become the mouth. They have an interior brain that surrounds the entrance. That surrounds the entrance of the digestive tract, and they have a ventral nervous system with paired or fused longitudinal cords. Okay, so let's look at this earthworm, which is an example of a protostome, and look at some of these features. So we can't really see the developmental feature of the blastopore becoming the mouth, but that's what happens. So we do have an interior brain that's up next to the opening or the entrance of the digestive cavity, which would be the mouth. So it's not always a very complex situation. Here we're in this earthworm, we refer to it as cerebral ganglia, sort of a concentration of nervous tissue. And then we have these paired or fused, in this case, this yellow nerve cord here. We see it's ventral, it's down the ventral part of the organism. And we have these paired ventral longitudinal, down the long way, nerve cords. There are massive amounts of variation in other traits. It's kind of a little bit difficult to come up with a nice, clean set of traits for a protostome because there is variation in body cavity. Some are coeliomates, some are pseudocoeliomates, some are acoeliomates. There's variation in digestive tract. Some have a complete digestive tract. Some have a blind gut. Some have, are parasitic, so they have like a greatly reduced or no digestive tract. And again, same thing with circulatory system. Some have an open circulatory system. Some have closed. Some can have either. Some have none. It's really all over the place. So here's the most accepted phylogeny of the protostomes, and this is the one that we're going to follow as we go through this chapter. And we're not going to look at every single organism here, but we are going to look at both of them. So we're going to start, actually let me back up here. So we're going to divide up and approach this by looking at the two major clades of the protostomes, the Lophotrochozoans and the Ecdysozoans. So we're going to kind of approach these separately. So there are 18 phyla within the Lophotrochozoa. We're not going to look at all of the phyla. There is extreme body form variation within the Lophotrochozoa. Oh, here's my eraser. That's fun. So the name comes from two structures that are possessed by some of the members. A lophophore, which is either a circular or a U-shaped ring of ciliated tentacles. That are typically around the mouth and used for feeding. So some members have this lophophore, and some members also have what's called a trochophore larvae. Which is a larval form that moves by beating cilia. And I think I have a picture of a trochophore larvae somewhere. I'll find it. Along the way, we'll look at a picture of this trochophore larvae. But this is where the name Lophotrochozoa comes from, a combination of this lophophore and this trochophore larvae. So this includes a great diversity of organisms, including flatworms, rotifers, mollusks, annelids. So, like the earthworms would be an annelid. These are the most well-known. So you are going to have some organisms in this group that you'll think, oh, I've heard of that before. So let's dig in and start with a phyla here. So we are going to start with the phylum Platyhelminthes, also known as the flatworms. These can be found in marine, freshwater, and damp terrestrial habitats. Some are parasitic, some are free-living, so I guess you could also say they can be found living in organisms. It's a big group with about 30,000 species. So we have both free-living and we have parasitic members. So they get their name flatwormed because they are dorsoventrally flattened, which means it looks like somebody put them between a book and smashed them flat like a pancake. They can be quite small, only a couple millimeters long to 20 meters long in the case of some tapeworms. They are acoeliomates. Okay, so no body cavity. Respiration and waste elimination occurs across the body surface. And materials will move around the organism via diffusion. There is no circulatory system. The flat body plan helps a lot with this because it has a high surface area to volume ratio. So the surface area for exchange of things like gases or waste with the environment is much more in the organism's favor than it would be for something that isn't really thin and flat. Its excretory system is something known, at least in some of them, as the protonephridia. So a protonephridia is a simple excretory structure that filters waste and helps maintain osmotic balance. So there are these cells called flame cells that have cilia, as you can see right here, that pull liquid through the body to be filtered. And we have these little excretory pores that we can get waste out of the body with. So what happens is, and the reason they're called flame cells is because these cilia are beating, and underneath a microscope it sort of looked like a flickering flame. So we have these protonephridia with these flame cells, and these cilia will beat and they will pull in material that needs to be filtered, and the sort of stuff that we need to filter out and get out can come out of these pores here. Oops. Get rid of that. The digestive system is pretty simple. Let's see if I have a picture. I don't. So the digestive system is pretty simple. We have a mouth here, which is going to lead to a gastrovascular cavity. They're showing that by this sort of darker brown color, which is branched. So you can see there's a lot of extensive branching in this digestive cavity to deliver nutrients to cells directly via diffusion. And this one opening will act as a mouth and an anus. Now, these are the structures we see in a free-living flatworm. If you are a parasitic flatworm, you probably lack a digestive system completely because you are just going to rely on diffusing the nutrients of the host, perhaps directly through your body wall, because you are just being suspended in the nutrients of the host body. So some, as I said, flatworms are free living. They are predators or scavengers. We might also find them, in an aquatic environment like a pond. They typically will glide along their ventral surfaces by cilia and mucus, or swim by an undulating motion. They tend to have these light-sensitive eye spots that will allow them to detect where light is. And they also often have chemical detecting lobes at the anterior end of the organism. So these features represent the cephalization of the organism. And they do, as you can see, also have a concentration of the nervous tissue up here, and they have those longitudinal nerve cords going down the body. So those are our free-living flatworms. We also have many parasitic flatworms. In fact, over half of all flatworms are parasitic. So they are a little simpler because their lifestyle really just involves hanging on and sucking up the nutrients from the host. They don't have as much to deal with in terms of encountering their environment or finding prey or anything like that. So they typically, these parasitic flatworms have some kind of sucker for attachment. They typically have a tough outer covering to help protect it from host defenses. And reproductive structures are actually going to make up the bulk of the interior. So basically these guys hang on, suck in nutrients, and they're basically reproducing machines. Nice, huh? So guess what you're looking at there? Yep, you are looking at a tapeworm hanging on to a mammalian, I believe a human, intestine. So I'm going to talk about two different types of parasitic flatworms that can be a problem for mammals, even humans. So the first group are known as the trematodes. Sometimes we also call these the flukes. These have a wide range of hosts and complex life cycles, usually that involve two hosts. One of these hosts we refer to as the primary host. So the primary host, oh, I can't write today, you guys, sorry. The primary host is going to be the species in which the adult version resides. And we also have the secondary host. This is the species in which the larval stage resides and matures. Okay, so let's look at an example. So blood flukes infect 200 million humans annually and can cause us a lot of problems, including pain, anemia, diarrhea. They're pretty nasty. Here's an example of the life cycle of a fluke going from its intermediate host, or sorry, I should say its secondary host, which is a snail. So the larvae will get into the snail where it will reside for a while as it starts to mature. The larvae becomes motile. It can infect a human. And in the human is where the adult version will reside. And it can reside there for many years, actually. Here, you're seeing both a male and a female, so kind of an interesting thing. The are what we would call dioecious, meaning they're different sizes. So, I'm sorry, did I say dioecious? I meant dimorphic. So the male is actually quite a bit larger than the female, and the female will actually reside on the male's body. The male will feed on blood and then pass some of this on to the female. Another image here, so a couple other images here. So we have here the oral sucker. This is how it's going to hang on to the host. And also we have another view which shows the internal organs, and almost all of this that you're looking at is reproductively related. Okay, so the tapeworms. Most parasitized mammalian vertebrates, like humans, I'm afraid to say. These guys can reach 20 meters long. It's pretty impressive. So they have an area at the end we call the scolex. So this scolex contains hooks that will attach onto the intestinal lining of the host. It doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't have a gastrovascular cavity or an anus. All it does is absorb nutrients from the host after the host digests food. So as I said, these guys basically just suck up nutrients and they are otherwise reproductive machines. So basically after this scolex, the tapeworm is a repeating series of segments called proglottids. These proglottids are composed entirely of sex organs. So the more mature proglottids are towards the end. And what happens is, after sexual reproduction and these proglottids have been fertilized, the gravid or pregnant, the fertilized proglottids are released into sections and leave the host in its feces. So these will be shed off the end and come out into the host feces. So there will be eggs inside these defecated proglottids that then get eaten by an intermediate host like a cow, a pig, or a sheep. And the tapeworm larvae will develop in cysts in the muscle of this host, of a cow, a pig, or a sheep. So that's the intermediate host. Humans acquire the tapeworm by eating the undercooked infected meat from a cow, a pig, or a sheep. So these can become, and then they reside in our digestive tract where they become this full adult form. And they can become so numerous and so large that they can actually block our intestines and cause nutritional deficiencies. So it's they're pretty horrifying. So here we have some tapeworms attached to a stomach wall. Here we have a beef tapeworm. So the intermediate host would be, a cow, and then you would get this from eating undercooked beef that is 25 feet long. Okay, so just think about this, or don't. Maybe I'm ruining your maybe I'm ruining your hamburgers for life, but it exists. It can happen. Okay. So let's talk about the phylum Rotifera. This is a little bit nicer to think about. Okay, so we've talked about our flatworms. Let's talk about our rotifers. So our rotifers are found in freshwater, marine, or damp terrestrial habitats. They are very, very small. Typically, it's difficult to see them without a microscope, but they are multicellular and have specialized organ systems such as a digestive system. Their digestive system is known as an alimentary canal, a digestive tube with 2 openings. These guys are pseudocoelomates. One of the features that is kind of a hallmark of the rotifers is this, no, I didn't mean to do it. This structure called a corona. It's a circle of cilia that create a current of water for feeding. So when it brings the current of water in, small organisms are swept along, and then these organisms can be sent down into the mouth, where they are pulverized in here, in this area called the mastax. Can crush and pulverize food particles to help with digestion. So the name rotifer has to do with rotation, and I think it translates to wheelbearer or something like that, because when these little cilia are in full movement, it kind of almost looks like a wheel rotating. It appeared to people like that when they were looking at them under the microscope, so it got this name. So, kind of an interesting thing about rotifers is that there is this group of rotifers known as the Bdelloid rotifers, and sorry about that, my computer froze up. So I was talking about the Bdelloid rotifers. And these Bdelloid rotifers are what we call parthenogenic, which means that their population exists entirely of females that produce more females from unfertilized eggs. So some are sexual when conditions are right, and will generate male eggs and female eggs. The males don't feed. They only survive long enough to fertilize females. But in some of these Bdelloid rotifers, they haven't found any evidence of sexual reproduction, which is really kind of puzzling. But what they hypothesized has happened is that these rotifers oftentimes live in wet environments that experience periodic drying. And when this drying happens, these rotifers kind of enter a state of suspended animation. And when the water comes back, they will be, come alive again. But during the desiccation, sometimes they can crack. And it's thought that genes are actually being exchanged during these desiccation periods, allowing for genetic recombination, even though the population is being composed of just females. So kind of an interesting situation going on there. All right, we're going to take a little break here and then pick up with phylum Annelida, which are our segmented worms, and they are a very big group indeed. So let's take a little deep breath before we start those guys.